Hey everybody, today I wanted to tell you about my second ayahuasca journey. If you haven't seen the video I did about my first one, you can check that one out if you want to. That was more what I would call like the societal and the familial patterns of narcissistic abuse and how I saw that from a very different perspective through the psychedelic medicine. And then the very first one in the series I did, which was kind of like an introduction to utilizing psychedelic medicine to heal the trauma from narcissistic abuse. Because everything comes down to perspective. Like, that's the shamanic point of healing, is your perspective. You can't change the past. You can't change what happened. You can only change your perspective of it now, like how you see it, how you understand it, how you relate to that, how you integrate that and carry it forward in life with you. So the second night that we drank, first of all, that morning we had done the kambo or sapo medicine, which is a frog from the Amazon jungle, and essentially this frog has like a poison on its back. So a long time ago, the natives figured out, how to like spread this frog, and then they can just kind of like gently take off the poison that it was releasing from its back, and they would collect it and put it like on a stick, like on an open piece of stick, like an open piece of wood, and then like this poison would be in the wood. And then essentially what the guide does is they have you spit on a little piece of this stick, and then they mix it up, with like a knife until it starts to like bubble and coagulate, and then it becomes like this like snotty looking thing. And so what happens is like your DNA then like gets imprinted into this frog poison. And so the ceremony sounds a bit drastic, but just bear with me. And there's actually Western medical science behind this now. Like there's an Italian scientist, I forget his name, but if you look up kambo medicine, the Italian scientist and the peptides that he discovered. And so now Western medicine is utilizing this frog poison to see how they can transform that into some kind of cure for all sorts of illnesses, especially autoimmune illnesses and inflammation. Like they even want to use it for like HIV studies and whatnot. It gets that powerful. So essentially what happens is, maybe you can see there's like a little bit of some scars here. There's 3 little points here. They're very faint now because it's been almost 2 years. But essentially what happens is they take like a little stick or a little piece of incense and they burn it, like a couple layers deep into the skin. I know it sounds really drastic, but that was actually the least painful or uncomfortable part of the whole situation. So burn the holes into your skin. Then they take this coagulated stuff off the stick. It's got the frog poison, it's mixed with your DNA. So now the frog poison knows your DNA, it knows your body, it knows your situation, like it knows where to go and what to do. And then they put it on like the open skin. And so what happens is like we go one at a time around the room. You have to have a lot of attention on the person doing it to make sure like they're okay and stuff, and they're prepared, for what's gonna happen. And so you can watch people like as it's happening, and at like almost immediately it's like this flush of red comes up into like the chest and the shoulders, and like the face like turns really red, and like your heart starts pounding and you feel like you can't breathe. And then all of a sudden, like the person, you can see like their face goes white, and then that's the point where you feel like you're going to die. And like before this experience was explained to me, before I decided if I wanted to do this, they told me, our guide told us that, the first 20 minutes or so, you feel like you're dying. And then the next 20 minutes or so, you wish you were dying. And then it's just kind of over. So true to story, the first like, oh my God, it's like intense. Like there's something like in your throat. Have you ever had like that, it's like feeling like something's in your throat and you can't move it? That was very prevalent. It's like pounding heart. I thought my heart was gonna like explode out of my body. It was hard to breathe, feeling like almost dizzy, like looking around the room, and like it was almost like, when you stand up too fast and your blood pressure drops, right? Almost like right before you pass out. There was kind of some of that. I went last out of the 5 or 4 of us that went at the time. One person waited till the last day, but so I went last. Everybody else was like already out of the Molucca. They were like retching, puking their brains out outside. You're supposed to puke a lot. Like normally people puke a lot. I was the only one who didn't puke from this, which is kind of weird. Like I felt nauseated. I felt like I wanted to throw up, but I couldn't move it from my body. I could just feel it like getting in there. and then, felt like crap for a while. And then about 45 minutes or so later, I felt like I was really back to myself, and, sweated and everything. So the guide recommended we went and showered and then had breakfast. And so like an hour after that, I just felt like vibrant, like so much more alive. Like the natives have used this medicine for hunting acuity, for, healing themselves for a long time. And I felt like I had so much energy, so vibrant. Everything was sharp and clear, and I still had this weird feeling in my throat. But our guide had said, tonight when we drink the ayahuasca, you're going to see how much more powerful the experience is because we did this first one. And so, we drank the medicine, and this was the night that we were able to start drinking in our own room. So just my brother and I were in our room, and he was sort of like laying down by the door, and I was sitting, on the floor in front of my bed. And within less, normally it takes 45 minutes to really kick in. Within like 20-ish minutes, it's hard to tell time, but within about 20 some minutes, like the sacred geometry already started coming on, and I was already like immediately knowing like tonight is going to be totally different than the last night. And as it was coming on, and like I can't even explain the intensity of it, but it was just coming up through my body, and I just thought, oh fuck, like where are we going to go with this? And so I don't know what happened between there, the geometry and all of this, and this feeling of like, oh God, where are we going, into all of a sudden totally in this bizarre, uncomfortable experience. And it got increasingly more uncomfortable until it was just like desperate. And to explain the visuals, it doesn't sound like anything. It was like I was observing this like mechanical world where there was like all this stuff going on. Like if you imagine even like a little boy's like play set, maybe there's like trains and cars and boats and like things are just, but imagine it's all moving on its own, and everything is moving and going, and like even the movement of it all was like nauseating to me. And so like the nausea was coming up, and I was just watching all this mechanical stuff happen, and just feeling like sicker and sicker and worse until I just felt like just almost like panic come over me. And then it would be like anxiety I've never experienced before. And like I know anxiety, but this was like a whole other level of anxiety where like the whole body was just restless. Like I just wanted to like jump out of my skin, get out of my body in some way, and just like restless, can't get comfortable, and like so uncomfortable. And then the nausea would come, and I'd be like, oh God, and I would like run to the bathroom, and I'd have my puke bucket, and just like nothing coming, and like just feeling like dry heaves, and like it wanted to come, but there was nothing physical. And then I was almost like as if I was puking, I was making these sounds, but nothing was coming out. And I understood like whatever this was, it wasn't a physical thing. Like it was something energetic, something spiritual, something. And I couldn't see anything, but it was so real. And I would just go into like the spin, and it was freezing. Like even this environment that I was watching, like this mechanical world, was so cold, like just horribly cold. And there in the bathroom, I was so cold, like down to my bones. Like everything was like shivering. Have you ever had one of those colds where like you can't get warm, you can't get better, and it's like you don't even want to move, you're so cold, but you want to get yourself to like a better place. But I was afraid to leave the bathroom because I was afraid something was trying to come out. And then I was like almost like I was just like holding on, you've heard me describe like holding on to my sanity by the kite string, and I was just holding on to that kite string so tight. And I was telling myself this mantra like, everything is okay, this is gonna pass, you know who you are, you know where you are. And I just kept reminding myself as I was like fixating on this one little like pixel on the glass ripples of the shower door, and I just like honed in on this one pixel and holding on to that kite string, like just trying to desperately hold myself in this reality, and just shivering and in this terror. And then go back into the room and like stumble in there and then like sit down and like grab the blanket and like put the blanket, two blankets over top of me, but like the blankets like fail to warm me because it's like not even like the physical environment, it's like something deep inside my soul. And then I'm back in it again, and then I catch myself breathing and I could hear my breath. It's like so labored. It's like, you know, when like you're just trying to get through something and it's so painful or it's just so drastic. And like this cycle went on, and then I would get restless and anxious and nauseated and I would go to the bathroom, and like this went on and on for probably hours, and those hours felt like an eternity. And I can tell you that like all of the traumas leading up to that revision of the pain, which I wasn't recognizing yet as what it was, but all of the past traumas compared to those few hours, none of those traumas compared to the amount of just terror and pain and emptiness and aloneness that I felt. But I couldn't even put like an articulation on what I felt at the time. Like there was no word. I couldn't even like express in a thought form, let alone speak it out loud, what was wrong, you know? And so I would just keep watching this over and over again. It didn't matter if my eyes were open or closed. I was like in it, like I was it, and it was me, the experience. It was all one. But despite the fact that it was all one, and despite the fact that I know that everything is one, I couldn't connect to anything in that reality. Like I would watch all this shit go by, and it was just, there was nothing there. There was no human, there was no emotion, there was no connection. And it was horrible. And like at one point I ended up just like crawling up into my bed because I was so like numbingly cold and shivering inside, and just like desperate for some shred of comfort. And some indeterminate amount of time went by, and suddenly the sound of the door opening like jarred me out of this state. And I was so grateful to hear that sudden sound because it pulled me out. But then very quickly I realized like my brother had left the room, and then it turned into like despair, and I knew he was going to go smoke a mapacho. Mapacho is like the pure tobacco. Like they don't allow you to smoke regular cigarettes during the ceremonies. Even if you have organic tobacco like I did, they prefer that you smoked mapacho. And so my brother went outside to smoke one, and you know the tobacco actually binds, according to it was explained to me, the tobacco binds to the same receptors in your brain as the DMT, the dimethyltryptamine, which is one of the main active ingredients in the ayahuasca. And so it kicks it up a notch, or it like brings like another wave of the experience back. So my brother goes out there to smoke, and I went back into this world, and I couldn't even like talk. And at some point I hear the door open, and I'm like, oh, thank God he's back. And somehow I was able to come out of where I was and muster up the words, "Can you talk to me?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And I just immediately could sense, like in that second, I downloaded like a big part of his experience, and I could tell that like he was just outside having this the whole experience for him was very different than the one I was having. And he was outside, and he was like experiencing the cosmos and his connection to that. And I knew that he had met Mama Ayahuasca. Like people talk about this feminine spirit that they see and experience, and sometimes guides them during the journeys. And I sensed it somehow. I just knew he had met her, and that he had had this amazing experience. And so he came over and started telling me about his experience and how he had taken this tour through the cosmos and seen her, and how, you know, before that he had seen society, and he had seen all these like this pillar of like climbing rats, and these rats had like red beady eyes, and like as he was climbing up this pillar he like reached down and helped a rat, you know, and then as soon as he helped the rat bit him and like laughed and ran away, you know. And he was having these like understandings, these deep experiences, and he was like in a very, you know, positive state. And he went on and was telling me, and as he was talking to me, it started to feel like a little bit better, but I was still in it. And then all of a sudden my brother goes, "So do you want to talk about what's bothering you?" And it was like this record screeching, and I was like, what's bothering me? And it was like that word bother like jarred me. And at first I was like, nothing's bothering me. And then I was like, well, of course I'm bothered. Don't you see me like struggling in my body, like trying to manage this experience? But then I realized like, no, something is actually bothering me. And I was like, okay. And so my brother asked me to like describe, I couldn't articulate it. He asked me to like describe the world. And as I started to describe it in words and out loud, the world started to dissolve a little bit. A little bit. It was still there and I was still in it. And I told my brother how cold and how lonely and how empty everything felt, and I couldn't connect with anything. And he said, well, and how nothing felt alive or human, right? And he said, but everything is alive. And I said, I know I know this to be true, but I can't believe it in this moment. I can't feel it. And if I can't feel it, it's not real to me right now. And he said, well, then plant a seed in that world and watch it grow. And so it took me forever to like, if you ever like tried to like imagine something and like force your mind to imagine it, and like each time you go to imagine it and then like you get distracted or like you can't do it or something, and then you have to keep going back into it, right? So like I kept doing this and I kept doing this, and it was so hard to like plant this seed in that world. And finally I did. And then it was like this image I saw online once where there's like this road or this highway, and then there's like this little seedling that bursts through, and then like the road's all like broken up, and you see this little seedling like coming to life and like shooting up into the light. And that's what it felt like all of a sudden in this world. But then still, I was still there, like nothing had changed. And so my brother said, he just kept asking me questions, like I was so grateful he was there. And he goes, he's like, okay, so imagine your puppy, like imagine Venus. And I started to imagine her and tried to imagine her, and it was like hard to connect with her. And then all of a sudden, like she was there, like she came running to the side of the bed. Now I had left her in the United States. She wasn't with me, but it was like she was there, and I felt her, and I pulled her in and I hugged her, and I could like feel like her fur and the feeling of her softness and the little sausage belly, and I could feel her squirming in my arms. And I just knew like, oh God, it just like suddenly I could start to feel emotion, and I just felt the love and the connection. And then I just started like crying, and I didn't realize how much I missed her and how hard it was going to be to leave her for those 2 months. And we were only like 3 weeks into the trip. And so I was crying, and my brother said, maybe you just didn't realize like how hard it was to leave her in the same week or within 1 week that you left your last relationship, and like I mentioned in the previous videos about the psychedelic experiences, I had gone there to drink ayahuasca specifically to crack the code on this whole narcissistic abuse thing and what my hook was with it, like what in me was attracting it. This last boyfriend that I had, this covert narcissist, I had left him, and I had left Portland, and then my brother and I met up, rendezvoused at my parents' house in Ohio for a week. I left my dog with my aunt. We repacked things and left a bunch of stuff there, and then within a week we took off for Peru, and then we traveled a little bit, and then within total like 3 weeks after I had left my boyfriend and Venus, within a week we were drinking the medicine. And then, I remembered, and I thought of him, and I thought of the relationship, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, like this feeling, this experience, that is everything that I felt when I was with him. And suddenly it had a name, and it was written like on the wall, and it was like decades of devastating loneliness. And then I saw like before him, like all the relationships, the bosses, the coworkers, some of the neighbors, some of the friends, my mom, my grandfather, like growing up. And I just watched it go back to like the beginning of my life. And I realized that feeling, that horrible world that I was trapped in of devastating loneliness, that is PTSD. That is how the victim feels from narcissistic abuse. Because when you're with this person who's just shut down, like they have purged every bit of true love from their system, and all they access are these primal emotions, and then they fabricate emotions, and then you can't really connect with them because they're emotionally unavailable at deeper, more intimate levels. And you just end up feeling just decades of devastating loneliness as this goes on your whole life. And I recognized it, and I thought, like, how the fuck did I bury that feeling all those years? Like, how did I go on? How did I function? How did I work? How did I go grocery shopping? How did I have a social life? How how did I do anything when I actually felt like that? And that's when you realize like the magnitude and the power of the survival mechanisms of the psyche, the subconscious holding that trauma down, because you're in survival mode. You have to function, you have to do things, right? And until you really see it and you have the experience where it's safe to see it and you're totally in your truth that you can see it, that's when it suddenly becomes so real and so recognizable. And like, I don't even understand how I was able to push that down until that moment. And fully accepting the magnitude of that, I was able to start to release from that and recognize that I don't want to feel like that anymore. I don't ever want to feel like that again. Ever. I don't ever want to have a relationship like that with anybody where I feel like that. And my brother and I we talked about a lot of things, and I had a lot of realizations, about my life. And then we had a lot of laughs, and my brother and I were even like snuggling at a certain point and recognizing like how important that physical touch is, and like how important it is that we hug each other, that we touch each other, that we feel each other, that we connect with each other, because like it's necessary for survival. It's necessary for our well-being. And the worst part about the trauma is not being able to talk about it, not being able to articulate it, not being able to put your finger and pinpoint what's wrong exactly. Just feeling this like general, impossible to explain dread feeling that something is wrong, but you can't figure out what it is, and it just leads you to feel so unhinged and so empty and so lost in life. And I recognized that it was that loneliness in me that was my hook, that was my wound, that was the wound that had been there. And that was what attracted those kinds of narcissistic people to me. Like, it was the familiarity of the past relationships. And it was also this hook of like desperately seeking someone to fill that emptiness, that loneliness. So when they would come on with that initial love bombing, it was a distraction from that loneliness. It was like, oh, somebody hears me, somebody sees me, somebody validates me, somebody wants me in their life, somebody wants to connect with me. And you think you're connecting, but you're actually not. They're not. I mean, you are. You're definitely building like an attachment to this person, but they're not. They're incapable. The narcissistic cluster B spectrum, they are just incapable of building those natural human attachments. So you end up feeling so alone, and you can't resolve it when the person is unwilling to talk about it, and they're not going to get help. They're not going to fix themselves. And for me that night, going through that ayahuasca experience was like truly the most intense and traumatic experience of my life. And like those few hours that felt like an eternity, that then purged through like this feeling that I'd been holding on to for decades. And I never felt that again since then. There were moments during my experiences in Peru, because then I realized that, Mama Ayahuasca would show me these things, and it was like Mama Ayahuasca was speaking to me through my brother that night. Like, he came with that presence and he asked me questions, and those questions helped me unravel what was wrong, because I couldn't get there myself. He helped empower me by asking me questions, and then I empowered myself by seeking the answers. And then it was like I had to go into the trenches. Like, I spent the next year exactly in the trenches, surrounded by these cluster B types, to figure it out, to like truly experience what the dynamics are in real time now with new awareness, still being in it and not understanding it like I do now. That came full circle when I had come back, and then I had seen other people's research, and I realized it was like a thing. Like, it wasn't just something that happened to me, like it happened to so many people, like an epidemic in society. But this was the night that really broke through for me. And it was like going through that breakdown to come out the breakthrough. And it was like ayahuasca had shown me my greatest pain, like the greatest pain that I had been repressing all my life. And that's the thing about trauma, is it only survives in what we repress, in the darkness, in the hidden. That's where the PTSD exists. But as we allow ourselves to feel it, as we allow ourselves to express it, to move through it, right? Instead of just pushing it away or pushing it down, or it just automatically getting stuff down without us even consciously realizing that it's happening, because we just have to go through the motions of the daily, And so I'm just so grateful that I had that experience, because wow, like I just really felt like it unstuck me. And yeah, it was traumatizing, and that's why like I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone, and I don't necessarily recommend it, I definitely don't recommend it immediately after the experience. Like I was desperate, I was at like a desperate point in my life, so I went for it and I needed to do it. And I already had some experience with psychedelic medicine, so it wasn't like the very first time I had that kind of experience, because I imagine you could come like completely unhinged, and if you didn't have really loving, truthful, honest support around you, it could be really dangerous, So if you want to have this experience, make sure that you're doing this in a healthy and safe environment with people who have experience, with people that are trustworthy, and with your own people too. Like having my brother there, like, wow, I don't know what it would have happened that night if he wasn't there. I don't think I would have had that kind of breakthrough. I don't know how I would have gotten out of that, or how that would have gone down. And again, that night, just feeling like the magnitude of the gratitude that I have that he's in my life, and that we had that experience together. And what was amazing was that the next night that we drank together, my intent that night was like, show me what my life path is, show me what my life purpose is. Like I always had a sense that it had something to do with holistic healing and helping people transform their lives, but it was never specific enough, and I never really had a niche. And I didn't have like a really powerful experience the third night. Like not a lot happened. It was very peaceful, and it was like waves of calmness and peace were soothing me after like the trauma of the previous one. But then that third night was the night that my brother went into like a really dark, heavy, chaotic space, and then the tables were turned, and I was there for him, and I was holding him, and I was asking him questions at time, and sometimes we were just in silence, touching one part of one another, like our arms, just so that like he knew that I was there and he wasn't alone in the world. And every now and then we would have a laugh or a cry, or we would like share an experience. And for initially that night when I was trying to fall asleep, I was like, well, I don't know that I really got my answer tonight. But it wasn't until retrospect that I understood, like the next morning when I was drinking my coffee and smoking a mapacho, that I realized that the point of the experience and what Aya had guided me toward was that is my path, helping people process the trauma of their past, particularly the narcissistic abuse of their past. And that was my purpose, was to help people through that, because I had done it and I had embodied it, and I'm still working on it. It's always a work in progress. I'm never going to tell you that I figured it all out and I'm totally healed, of all that, because it's still with me to some degree. And I do believe that to some degree it is always with us. But when we can get to that point where we can extract the passion and the purpose from it, when we can use it instead of allowing it to use us, when we can do something beautiful with it, that's where it's all worth it. That's where it was totally worth it, because we get something out of that. And what you recognize from this sort of expanded, wider spiritual perspective is that all of that happened for a reason, not because you deserved it and not because you were a bad person, but because it was some sort of like shamanic initiation, spiritual initiation, call it what you will. It was some kind of awakening within your soul for you to answer some kind of higher calling in your life. And I'm not here to tell you what your purpose is or what your calling is. That's for you to discover. And every person has a unique one. a unique sense of purpose, a unique gift to share with other people, and you don't have to be affecting like the massive world at large. You're affecting the people around you, and by affecting the people around you, you're spreading that wave, like the ripple effect through the world. It may not seem like you're doing a lot, but you are. That's why when you work on yourself, when you heal yourself, when you liberate yourself from the path, it's almost like you're giving this energetic permission to other people around you to do the same. Like they tune into that and they're like, it's possible. You did it. I can do it, right? And so like it's like it gives them this like inspiration and spark to want to heal themselves, and it just spreads. That's how it becomes contagious. That's how the awakening becomes contagious. That's how we change the world, is one person at a time, starting with yourself, going within, healing yourself, continually working on yourself, and recognizing that it's never over. You know, it's always a work in progress. So I wanted to share that experience with you because, you know, that was the night for me that was like the massive, massive breakthrough. And it was really, really, really hard. And would I do it again, knowing what I know? Yes, I know I would. Like, as tormentous as it was, and how like I will never even ever forget the smell of that medicine, because like throwing it up and like just feeling like it's coming out of your pores, like I will never forget that smell. And anytime I smelled it, it's like, ugh. But I still remember that the value of that experience and how much that's changed my life. And so that's what I wanted to share with you guys, this little mini series on the ayahuasca. I had drank it several more times after that. I'm gonna probably do a few more of these sporadically, where I talk about either the ayahuasca experiences and or the experiences I had with Wachuma, which is the San Pedro cactus. It's this cactus cousin of peyote, which is used more in North America. I want to talk about that. It's mescaline based. That is incredibly healing for narcissistic abuse and for trauma too, because that one is very integrating. Like the ayahuasca is like what breaks up the stagnation, so it can be very uncomfortable. You can get to those places of feeling the unity and the oneness of all that is, but I found that the Wachuma is much more that experience, and it was always that experience with me. In some way it was more of like this unifying, I'm part of everything kind of experience, and always was, right? And then also my experiences with psilocybin mushrooms, because I had a couple really big breakthroughs through those as well, and also through MDMA, which is the pure form of ecstasy. And if you're curious about that, I would look up MAPS, which is Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and check out the research that MAPS is doing on PTSD. They've been doing this for years. They're finding an 83% success rate. 3 treatments. It's psychotherapy and MDMA for 8 to 10 hours or so. They have 2 psychotherapists per person who's going through this, and they found an 83% success rate. These people with treatment-resistant PTSD, in other words, nothing else was working for their symptoms. They had 3 of these experiences, and 83% of them no longer qualified for PTSD symptoms, right, for the actual label of PTSD. And I truly feel that MDMA has amazing potential for PTSD in particular. I would recommend that more, and not that you do it recklessly and necessarily in finding it on the street or anything like that, but know that there is hope, and it's coming soon. By 2021, which is less than 5 years away, MAPS is already on track to have it FDA approved, what they call MDMA assisted psychotherapy. So it's not going to be like they write you a prescription like Prozac or Zoloft or something. It's going to be where you're going to have to do this in supervision, with professionals like psychiatrists and whatnot, who are able to prescribe the medicine. Do this in the therapy session with them responsibly, and then take with you the experiences, have psychotherapy before and after, to integrate things. And by 2021, this is going to be legal, FDA approved treatment for PTSD. So it's not that far away. I mean, we think about where we've come from. It's been illegal on the Schedule 1 list of drugs here in USA, and then of course around the world because of the DEA, and that's all going to be changing by 2021, which is amazing. So keep an eye out for that on the horizon, if that's something you're interested in down the line. Also, the MAPS Association is moving into the 3rd phase of clinical trials this year. They're already training lots of therapists to move to the next next phase where now they're gonna be working with like over 1,000 people, I think. So, if you're interested in that, I don't know when they're gonna be looking for people as participants, but if that's something that's calling you, check it out, and wow, to be able to have that kind of experience, those people are just incredibly lucky. Also check out YouTube. You can find some videos of people who had those experiences with MAPS. Some of them were soldiers, returning vets. Some of them are people who went through abuse or, rape experiences, for example. There's one where there's like a mother talking about her PTSD recovery. I mean, just amazing to hear these experiences. So, I really do believe that there is massive, massive healing potential when psychedelic medicines are used in a ritual context with responsibility in a healthy and safe environment with experts, there to guide people safely through it. And I believe that this is going to open the new paradigm of psychology and consciousness. I do believe that we are now in between these paradigms of, the old way of seeing things and the new way, where we're going from here. And I think that psychedelics are an incredible bridge to open that path, to allow us to see things that we couldn't see before, to realize that, what we think is real and what we think is reality is a very, very, very small percentage of what's real and what's actually happening all around us. And we just don't pay attention because our brains isolate about 7 to 8 bits of information per second from the infinite amounts of information that exist in the space around us and within us. That is the frontier of science and medicine and consciousness, I believe. So thank you for tuning into this series. And, if you're really interested in psychedelic medicine, check out some of the videos on YouTube from MAPS, from Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. Check out their research. Check out the research on ayahuasca taking place in Barcelona, Spain, under Josep Fabregas. And also there's another one, Dr. Jordi Riba, I think is his name. Both of them are working at Sapo, I think it's called, University in Barcelona. They're doing like the first studies. I think they're doing fMRI studies and whatnot with ayahuasca. They're doing some really amazing work. If you want to look at it from the perspective of addictions and working with addictions, check out Takiwasi, which is a center in the Amazon of Peru, and it's led by a French psychiatrist named Jacques Mabit, and he works with addicts there. Addicts spend 9 months there, and he has a 60% success rate working with addicts. I mean, I'm talking like heroin, alcohol, cocaine, like all the really heavy, bad addictions that are really, really hard to break. And that is like tremendously higher than the success rate that we're finding in most of like the approved addiction treatments, for recovery here in the West. Like the 12-step programs, there's approximately 5 to 10% success rate. And so, he's not just using ayahuasca, he's using psychotherapy. Excuse me. That's something in my throat, getting dry. I'm gonna wrap this up, but he's using psychotherapy, ayahuasca, community service, artwork, all kinds of things. And then the people that are there working with each other in living in very close quarters and interacting, they're living out through their human relationships like the in-life test of what they're learning through the psychedelic medicine journeys. And of course there's lots of psychotherapy, to support them before and after. And of course the psychotherapists have all worked with the psychedelic medicine, so they really understand, can help them integrate the experiences, and that's also something that I do. Like I do the coaching to help people self-heal and to transform their lives after narcissistic abuse. I also do the integration coaching after psychedelic medicine journeys. I can't do the psychedelic medicine journeys here in the United States because of legal reasons. However, if you have had these experiences and you would like to process and integrate those with someone who really understands that world and can see it in the context of, recovering from the trauma of the abuse and understanding those patterns, so that you can take that forward with you in a new way, let me know. I can help you with that kind of coaching as well. Thank you for tuning in. And if you have any comments, feel free to leave those below. Sending you all a big hug.